Rule number 102. At Hopper Academy, I learned to grasp concepts like profitability and other things like Latinum. I liked anything with numbers. Here's a typical math problem. You fill in the blanks with the correct numbers and then use the overall result to validate one of the rules of acquisition. Ready? The lifespan of a Mysium bogfly is how many hours? 12 hours. Lifespan of a tube grub is how many weeks? 10 weeks. Shelf life of a chilled tube grub is how many months? 7 months. How much time does it take snail juice to spoil? 193 days. Lifespan of a woolly slug, that's 12 years. Lifespan of a Federation human, approximately 130 years, but seems a lot longer because their lives are so boring. Lifespan of a Klingon warrior. Oh, who cares? Any day is a good day for one of those smelly psychotics to die. Lifespan of a Ferengi. Up to 300 years with proper load maintenance. What's the shelf life of a bar of latinum? Forever. Shelf life of a strip of latinum? Forever. Shelf life of a slip of latinum? Forever. Do the math yourself, but anyway you figure it, the results will still validate the 102nd rule of acquisition. Nature decays, but latinum is forever. I find it reassuring to know that my assets will outlive me. Rule number 104. On Ferenginar, religion and marketing go hand in hand. At least they do now, after what happened in the year 207. That's when Grand Nagus Gint, the first Grand Nagus, the enlightened prophet of greed, died in an unfortunate tooth-sharpening accident. Ferengi worldwide went into a deep, dark depression. Gint had not named a successor. Would he turn out to be the first and only Grand Nagus? All of Ferenginar held his breath to find out. Then, one day, a voice cried out above the wailing and the weeping.
Fear not, Gint will return to us, his mind as sharp as his teeth.
The voice belonged to Yost, a charismatic young Ferengi.
If every single Ferengi purchases a Gint memorial figurine and prays to it nightly, the blessed exchequer will release Gint from the divine treasury and allow him to descend back down to Ferenginar. It'll be good.
Yost's message swept the planet. It is believed that there were approximately 3 billion Ferengi alive at the time, but archaeologists have uncovered over 8 billion Gint figurines. They're the most common artifact on Ferenginar and are often used to this day as back scratchers. But despite this show of pious consumerism, Gint never came back. On the other hand, Yost, who owned a sizable share in the factories manufacturing the figurines, quickly became the richest man on Ferenginar. So rich, in fact, that he himself became the second Grand Nagus. His first official act was to reveal the second rule ever created, the 104th rule of acquisition. Now, as people came to appreciate the truth of the rule, they realized that in some strange way, Yost had truly embodied the spirit of Gint and was a worthy Grand Nagus indeed. So, in honor of Yost, Gint, and 8 billion back scratchers, I present to you the 104th rule of acquisition. Faith moves mountains of inventory. And just a little reminder to you pious humans, the meek can inherit the earth, the Ferengi will take the rest. But back to 104. If you're puzzled how the second rule was named the 104th, too bad. You should have read the best-selling collector's item, The Ferengi Rules of Acquisition. Go buy it, or remain confused. Hey, it's up to you. Rule 111. It's important to keep in mind that the rules of acquisition are more than just dry aphorisms gathered in a book. They are rich treasure troves of practical advice, which, if followed closely, are sure to improve every aspect of your life. If you don't believe that, here's an example of how the rules work for me. I recently wrote this letter to a favorite Bajoran customer. Dear esteemed customer, it's that time of year again. The Bajoran Gratitude Festival is only a few days away. And in keeping with our tradition here at Quark's, we will celebrate the festival by allowing you to express your gratitude to me and to Quark's. I like to think that Quark's isn't just my bar, it's your bar too. And right now, your bar needs a new coat of paint. Now, I know painting isn't always fun, but think of the satisfaction, the sense of purpose, not to mention the exercise you and customers like you will get by doing the job. Think of how it will help ease your guilt. I know how miserable you must be, knowing that your overdue bar tab is placing an unnecessary financial burden on me and on Quark's. True, I suppose I could get a couple of Nausicaans to see to the collection of your tab, but the only people who would really enjoy that would be the Nausicaans. And personally, if there's one thing I can't abide, it's a cheery Nausicaan. Now, painting Quark's won't forgive your debt. Hell, it won't even reduce it. But it will make you feel better. A lot better than if you were visited by the Nausicaans. And there's nothing I like so much as making my customers feel better. Peldor Joy, Quark, son of Keldar, proprietor, Quark's Bar, Grill, Gaming House, and Holosuite Arcade, a wholly owned subsidiary of Quark Enterprises, Inc. Then I wrote a letter to my brother. Dear Rom, I'm painting the bar tomorrow. Or to be more precise, you and a bunch of deadbeats are painting the bar tomorrow. Be there. Your loving brother, Quark. Trust me, by the time they were done, the bar never looked better. And what do I have to thank for that? The 111th rule of acquisition. Treat people in your debt like family. Exploit them ruthlessly. Rule number 112. Let's face it, we've all thought about breaking this rule at one time or another. I mean, almost every boss has one. Usually the family is rich, so there's the inheritance factor to consider. Plus, forbidden fruit is always the most succulent. But don't do it. That's right. Though your lobes may be a quiver, all tingly and taut, walk away. No matter how beautiful she is, no matter how crooked her teeth, how bulbous her nose, no matter how willing and submissive she might be, believe me, it is not worth it. Don't ever, under any circumstances, no matter how tempted you might be, forget the 112th rule of acquisition. Never have sex with the boss's sister. Rule number 113. That said, here's the thing about Rule 113, better known as the rule that dares not speak its name. The Ferengi are a male-dominated society. The rules of acquisition are written for males, by males, and about males. And if that weren't bad enough, let me just remind you there are no female bosses on Ferenginar. And for that matter, no female employees. I will say no more. The rest is silence. Thus, I record here, without further comment, the 113th rule of acquisition. Always have sex with the boss. Yikes. Rule number 121.
With that happy, slimy taste.
In the financial history of Ferenginar, there have been many success stories, but few as impressive as that of Vorp and Sluggo, the creators of that ubiquitous beverage with that happy, slimy taste, Ylvasr. Vorp and Sluggo were boyhood friends, boon companions, almost since their fathers signed the rental agreements on their mothers' wombs. One of their favorite games was stomping around in the Bowog Bog, just a short jaunt from their home in Upper Bowog Bay. Now, Vorp, some would say, was, well, short on brains and long on enthusiasm, not to mention slavishly loyal to the smarter, craftier Sluggo. So, whenever Sluggo was in need of a good chuckle, and Sluggo loved to laugh, he would convince Vorp to do something funny.
Hey, Vorp, we all need air to breathe, right? Have you bought any air today? You don't want to run out. Say, I'll give you a day's worth for that half slip in your pocket.
Vorp thought it sounded like a good idea and gave Sluggo his half slip of latinum. Then he asked Sluggo for his air.
Oh, right, Vorp. Okay, take a deep breath. Yeah, breathe in a kilo full. That's all you paid for, but that'll get you through the day. Of course, then you'll have to buy some more.
So, Vorp took a deep breath, while Sluggo laughed his head off. When Vorp would run out of latinum to buy air, Sluggo kept himself amused by getting Vorp to talk to females or eat a few kilos of sand. Which brings us to that fateful day in the Bowog Bog when Sluggo saw a particularly fetid pool of burbling muck.
Hey, Vorp, that muck looks good to drink.
The words were hardly out of Sluggo's mouth before Vorp got down on his hands and knees and started slurping. Sluggo stood and contemplated Vorp's prodigious posterior, which was pointed straight up into the air as Vorp bobbed his head to lap at the muck. But before Sluggo could give his friend's rear a quick kick, Vorp turned back, his mouth slick with slime, and through algae-stained teeth uttered those 4 famous words. Tastes like eel. And thus Ylvasr was born. Soon, bottle after bottle of this natural treat was rolling off the assembly line, all featuring the smiling faces of Vorp and Sluggo, pond scum dripping from their chins.
With that happy, slimy taste.
And so it went for 40 years. The two friends bought a huge mansion and lived there with their only companions, a menagerie of albino fang cats, all of whom developed a taste for Ylvasr. People shook their heads in confusion at their unconventional lifestyle, but one thing was certain. Vorp and Sluggo were friends. That is, until
With that happy, slimy
Sluggo Cola. A consortium of beverage makers, brought to the brink of bankruptcy by the perennial boom market for Ylvasr, finally came up with a new drink that beat Ylvasr in hundreds of clandestine taste tests. But the beverage makers knew they needed a marketing gimmick to overcome Ylvasr's media domination. And so, in one of the most cunning coups in Ferengi business history, they secretly offered Sluggo 65% of the profits from their new beverage in exchange for being allowed to name it after him. The thought of only one algae-stained grinning chin on a beverage label appealed to Sluggo. And as Sluggo so succinctly put it,
65% beats 50% any day.
the rest, as they say, is history. Sluggo moved out of the mansion. Sluggo Cola grabbed a 71% share of the beverage market, and Vorp died alone and heartbroken, devoured by a horde of ravenous albino fang cats, which had grown too despondent to feed. Vorp had learned a hard lesson, and he ordered it inscribed on his memorial. If you ever visit the Bowog Bog, put on your wading boots and slog your way to the Vorp Memorial. There you will find, carved for all to see, Vorp's immortal last words. Words of wisdom, which soon became the 121st rule of acquisition. Everything is for sale, even friendship. Rule number 123. At Hopawup Academy for Young Loblings, the core curriculum was based on the rules of acquisition. We learned that those Ferengi who created the rules were inspired by the blessed exchequer of the divine treasury. The enlightened 123rd rule was inspired in the darkest of times. It was found in the diary of Roplop of Ranglehorn. To get my money's worth and to take a deserved day off, I had those two fat-lobe Ferengi, Gala and Kono, whom I hired to help record this epic audiobook, dramatize the entries from Roplop's diary. Okay, Ram, play it.
Day 1. Today, after long preparation, we have started our descent. The words that Professor Derville, in his heavy, sploonish mountain accent, spoke those many weeks ago still ring in my ears.
Hi, come with me on a journey to the center of Ferenginar.
At least, that's what I think he said. Who can tell with that accent? Day 5. Still going down. Day 16. Reached the shore of an underground sea. Built a boat of buoyant pumice stone and set sail. Got violently seasick. Threw up all over Professor Derville.
You thrown up my Guten. My head is no schnickten globen.
Whatever he shouted at me, I couldn't understand. Day 18. Left sea behind. Found a cave full of never-before-seen wild fungi. Professor Derville exclaimed,
Behold, the mysteries of the underworld.
Day 24. 8 fungi samples. Yummy! Day 30. Fungi poisoning subsiding. Feel much better. Day 46. Professor Derville has finally reached a decision.
We will take the Luft passageway.
Personally, I would have gone right, but he's the professor. Day 51. Still hopelessly lost. Professor now claims to have said Richt passageway, but I'm sure he said Luft. Day 59. Where the hell are we? Food running low. Professor going blind. Day 83. Professor Derville, though blind, whispers in my lobe.
Oh, Rob, love, I see the glow of light coming from one of the many tunnels. The tunnel.
Maybe he's right. We'll wait another day before eating him. Day 84. Professor Derville was right. There was a glow, but it wasn't a way out. It was a vast deposit of pure latinum. I am rich and very hungry. Day 90. Professor Derville picked clean. He was good. Still hungry. Day 123. Weak Starving. Still rich. Can't go on. I just can't go on. Really. Can't go on.
Rom, stop the recording. Whose book is this? Oh, thus ends the sad tale of Roplop of Rangahorn. Perhaps you know it from the famous Holosuite drama starring Flink as Professor Derville and Gormagormatop as Roplop. But trust me, the holodrama is good, but the rule of acquisition is even better. Scribbled under day 85 in Roplop's journal, we see the first mention of the 123rd rule of acquisition. Even a blind man can recognize the glow of latinum. Rule 139. Okay. Time for a little Ferengi language lesson. Rom, put on the language tape.
Wife in Ferengi is booplop, from boop, which means to serve, and lop, which means one who does a certain thing. Brother in Ferengi is duplop, from dupe, which means to get, and of course, lop. So, to Ferengi there is no more obvious rule than booplop boop, duplop doop.
Or in your less poetic human dialect, the 139th rule of acquisition. Wives serve, brothers inherit. And that's one of my brother Rom's favorite rules. In fact, it's also one of my favorite rules, along with the 6th rule of acquisition. Never allow family to stand in the way of opportunity. Sorry, Rom. Rule 162. When my father, Keldar, as you humans would say, bit the dust, I was bereft. I was still a relatively young Ferengi, and I was concerned that I would not have anyone to instruct me in the finer points of Ferengi philosophy. Then I remembered that my father and Latinum were never exactly on a first-name basis, and so I didn't feel so bad. After all, I was no worse off without him than I was with him. Needless to say, I didn't have much hope when it came to the opening of my legacy chest, the gift every Ferengi father leaves behind for his son. Sure enough, when I opened the chest, what did I find? Deeds to tracts of lands containing rich mineral deposits? Not a chance. Incriminating documents that would allow me to blackmail the Grand Nagus? No. So, what did he leave behind? One word. Head skirts. Dozens and dozens of head skirts. And I don't even wear head skirts. Fafa knew that. My first thought was to throw myself onto the floor and kick and scream until the blessed exchequer descended from the divine treasury and gave me my heart's desire. So I kicked and I screamed. But no one came. Finally, hoarse and exhausted, I grabbed one of the head skirts to dry my tears. And then I noticed something. There was writing on the head skirt. I survived the Bowog flood. The Bowog flood? I'd learned about that in school. In 998, the Bowog Dam mysteriously burst, only days after its warranty expired, and thousands of Ferengi drowned. Had my father really been at Bowog? Then I noticed another skirt, an ancient threadbare garment bearing the motto, I stood tall during the great earthquake of 12,023. Soon I realized that all of the skirts bore witness to one great disaster or another. I stayed cool during the eruption of Mount Tuba Tuba. I kept solvent despite the financial collapse of 15,799. And I dodged the timber weevil stampede, Weevilville, 9,183. A cold shiver went down my spine. Could my father have been some kind of foul specter, moving from one disaster to another throughout Ferengi history? Or did he just have bad taste in clothes? But then it hit me, like a headbutt from a Klingon. My father was trying to teach me one final lesson, because each headskirt had a price tag attached, which meant someone had bought them, and more important, someone had sold them. In the midst of all that suffering and death, someone had been racking their brains to come up with a nice, catchy slogan to put on a headskirt. My father had passed to me a vivid illustration of the 162nd rule of acquisition. Even in the worst of times, someone makes a profit. Rule number 181. Every Ferengi schoolboy knows the story of Milch the Wanderer, how he traveled the spaceways, meeting primitive aliens and selling them Ferengi beads and trinkets in exchange for, well, whatever they had. Who can forget how he purchased the entire planet of Wahakan for a single crate of Ferengi tooth sharpeners? Yes, when it came to shafting the natives, Milch had the magic touch. Needless to say, Milch was one of Ferenginar's greatest heroes. Even to this day, every Ferengi hopes to make the pilgrimage to Crullus Prime, to climb the stairs of Guilfoyle, and to stand on the Stone of Dever, where the Crullers, realizing they just sold their entire female population for a fruit basket, finally ended Milch's glorious career, not to mention his life. It's a long journey to Crullus, but it is worth it, because it was there, on that holy spot, before the flames consumed him, that Milch uttered his famous last words.
Ouch!
I mean, aside from that. And my eyes tear and my breast swells with pride as I recall Milch's final defiant cry, as recorded in the 181st Rule of Acquisition.
Not even dishonesty can tarnish the shine of profit. No!
Rule 189. I'll now share with you a letter I wrote to my nephew Nog. You'll see how he's put into action the 189th Rule of Acquisition. To Cadet First Class Nog, Starfleet Academy, Pike Hall, Room 714, San Francisco, California, 9411 6S F8911, North American Administrative District, Earth, Sector 001, United Federation of Planets. Dear Nog, just heard the news from your father. I have to admit, I was more than a little concerned that attending Starfleet Academy would dull your instincts for profit. But to find out that you have been implicated as the leader of a Dom-Jot gambling ring among the cadets, I am so proud. Now, Rom seems to think that you're concerned about how this might affect your Starfleet career. I hope he has, as usual, misread the situation. But on the slim chance you may actually be a bit worried, let me put things in perspective. Sure, you may have lost some status among the other cadets, and yes, this incident will undoubtedly go down on your permanent record, and perhaps in some not-so-far-distant future, humanocentric powers that be may use this as an excuse to prevent you from achieving that captaincy you have your heart set on. But believe me when I tell you, it's worth it. At least, I certainly hope it was worth it. I've been told you can make a lot of money hustling, Domjot. If you need investment counseling, you know who to call. Your loving Uncle Quark. That nephew of mine may have been corrupted by Federation values, but at least he apparently still remembers the 189th rule of acquisition. Let others keep their reputation. You keep their latinum. Rule number 203. In my life, I have only met two people who actually have written a rule of acquisition. One was Grand Nagasek, leader of the Ferengi Alliance and the greatest business mind in the Alpha Quadrant. The other was Stumpy Strope, restaurateur, bartender extraordinaire, philosopher, and friend. I met him while I was a ship's cook on a Ferengi trader, tramping around the galaxy seeking my fortune. He owned a watering hole on the frontier world of Rough Landing. We used to stop there every 2 months to pick up supplies. I always looked forward to those visits and the happy times at Stumpy's bar. I'd stay after closing, and we'd drink long into the night. It was Stumpy who taught me how to mix my first black hole, to run a double wheel, and to shortchange even the most vigilant customers. But one thing we never talked about was Stumpy's right leg, or lack thereof. He didn't seem to want to discuss it, and I didn't press it. But then came my final visit. I'd signed the lease for Quarks, and I wanted to pay my respects before saying goodbye to Rough Landing forever. Stumpy and I had a hell of a time that night. Black holes, flaming novas, blood wine. We drank it all. And by the dawn, even Stumpy's ears seemed to be weaving unsteadily. And that's when I finally got up the courage to ask the big question. Stumpy, how'd you get the name Stumpy? He looked at me for a long time. His eyes seemed to mist over as if recalling a great sorrow. Quarky, you're a fine Ferengi lad. So I have to believe you know your rules of acquisition. I do. So, you know Rule 203? Like my own name. At that drunken moment, I was desperately trying to recall my own name when Stumpy leaned over the bar, propped himself up on his one good leg, then tilted his head close to mine. Our noses were almost touching. And when he spoke, it was with the fire of righteousness. And one too many flaming novas. Just before I passed out from the fumes, this is what I heard. Rule 203. I wrote it. And as my consciousness faded, I finally remembered what I like to call Stumpy's rule, the 203rd rule of acquisition. New customers are like razor-toothed greenworms. They can be succulent, but sometimes they bite back. Rule number 211. So, keeping Stumpy's rule in mind, I went off to open Quarks. And that's where Rule 211 comes in. You'll find it in every Ferengi business establishment, both on Ferenginar and off-world. Sometimes it's written large across the walls. Other times it's subtly tucked away in some obscure corner. But believe me, it's there. It's always there. 15 little words. The same 15 words that are said to every graduate of the Har-Yel-Vard Academy when they receive their diplomas. 15 words that form the foundation of all Ferengi business. Try to make profit without them, and you are doomed to fail. Remember them, and everything is possible. Honor the 211th rule of acquisition. Employees are the rungs on the ladder of success. Don't hesitate to step on them.
No!
Damn good advice. Rule number 229. The greatest sculptor in the history of Ferenginar was Milo the Mold Master of the city of Glunge. You may have seen his famous statue, Lance and his nose flute, which still stands in the Glunge marketplace today. But Milo's greatest work was his statue of Voshma the Voluptuous. This life-size representation of a naked Ferengi female was so breathtakingly beautiful that it was said no male could look on it and not fall hopelessly in love. Maybe it was the perfectly carved nose, maybe it was the delicate lobes, or maybe it was just the fact that she was made of solid gold-pressed latinum. But if Voshma had many admirers, none was purer in his devotion than Milo himself. Some say Milo even spoke to the lifelike statue, that he treated it in every way as if it were his own wife. Let's just say that Milo got very little work done. But one day, a strange thing happened. As he was contemplating Voshma's perfect golden hindquarters, Milo heard a buzzing sound in his workshop.
Open your palm.
Confused, Milo did as he was told. To his amazement, a small creature landed on his open hand. The creature looked like a teeny tiny, itsy-bitsy Ferengi with wings.
I am Snip, spirit of love, and few on Ferenginar love as strongly as you do. Such devotion deserves reward.
Now, this sounded good to Milo. After all, no Ferengi ever turned down a reward. So, Milo asked what Snip had in mind. Snip smiled.
You adore Voshma so much, but your love is wasted on cold, hard latinum. I will make Voshma a real Ferengi female, so that your passion can be consummated and your love made real.
Now, Milo was a quick thinker, and he did some quick calculations. And he came to a quick conclusion, and he told Snip, thanks, but no thanks. Then, Milo brought his hands together with a thunderous clap. That clap could be heard clear across the city of Glunge, and Snip was no more. Milo wiped his hands on his pants and went back to contemplating the golden beauty that was Voshma. Though I'm sure he was sorely tempted, Milo was obviously a firm believer in the 229th rule of acquisition. Latinum lasts longer than lust. Rule number 255. The following article appeared on the front page of the Ferengi Acquirer on Globova 5th, 18,083. Gouge mining magnate escapes death, wife charged in murder attempt. In the early morning hours, Latinum mining king Squeeb, son of Bean, was hauled from the flaming wreckage of his skimmer by two members of his private medical staff. Though suffering from various injuries, Squeeb is expected to make a full recovery. Shortly after his rescue, FCA liquidators arrested the victim's wife, Jubletta, and charged her with attempted murder. It seems Jubletta had struck her husband over the head with a bar of latinum, stuffed his unconscious body into his skimmer, and then programmed its autopilot to crash into one of Squeeb's own gouge mines. Luckily, unbeknownst to his wife, Squeeb has a duridium plate in his head, an unwanted souvenir from his stint in the military during the Lytasian conflict. This plate cushioned the blow, enabling Squeeb to regain consciousness at the last moment and seize control of the skimmer, causing a fiery but not fatal accident. Initial reports indicating that Jubletta was having an affair with Squeeb's accountant, Vinks, and was conspiring with him to take over Squeeb's financial empire seemed to be in error. Vinks was questioned by liquidators, but released on Squeeb's request. No charges have been filed against the accountant. Now, read between the lines, and you'll see that duridium plate or no duridium plate, Squeeb was a shrewd businessman. even in a crisis, he didn't forget the 255th rule of acquisition. A wife is a luxury. A smart accountant is a necessity. Rule number 261. It's said something strange happened to Squeeb, the Latinum mining king, after his brush with death. He began to spend his days wandering about the countryside, smelling the bog flowers, watching the suns set. Obviously, the man was deeply ill, but before he could seek professional help, fate, in the form of a holodocumentary he was watching, dealt him a cruel hand. The program detailed the plight of Ferengi gouge miners. Gouge mining isn't much fun. The hours are bad, the pay is low, and the workers have a life expectancy only slightly larger than a Tellurian gnat. Squeeb actually started worrying about his workers. Lost in his madness, Squeeb decided to see for himself how his miners lived. Traveling to one of his largest gouge mines, he personally donned a pair of protective lobe shields and descended into the sweltering hot mine. There, he revealed his presence to the miners and announced that he wanted to hear any grievances they might have against him. It is said that by the time the miners were through with him, all that was left of Squeeb was the battered diridium plate that once lined his skull. So, let's have a moment of silence for poor confused Squeeb. And while we're at it, how about we dedicate the 261st rule of acquisition to his memory? A wealthy man can afford anything except a conscience. See what happens when you forget your rules? Rule number 266. This audiobook was intended as a public service, a way to help you pathetic humans achieve your true profit potential, which admittedly in most of your cases isn't much. But hey, you gotta try. And in the spirit of service, I thought it might be a good idea, as we draw to a close, to provide some specific examples of what to do when your misuse of these rules leads you astray. In other words, in business, as in life, it always pays to have a good lie ready for emergencies. Here are a few of the best. Your payment is en route by subspace transfer. When I mentioned that profit figure, I clearly stated that it was only an estimate. I have no independent recollection of those events. Ear massages are commonly exchanged during Ferengi business negotiations. Quark? Never heard of him. And, my personal favorite, it's my brother Rom's fault. Try them out. Once you see how well they work, you'll never tell the truth again. And never forget the 266th rule of acquisition. When in doubt, lie. Rule number 284. Well, you're almost there. Just a few more moments to go. But before you finish this audiobook and put it on your shelf in a place of honor, take the box this audiobook came in and walk over to the nearest mirror. Hold the box up to the mirror. Now look at yourself holding the box in the mirror. Ask yourself why you bought it. Oh, sure, I'm clever, hilarious, and erudite, and my audiobook makes a great gift. But we both know that's not why you shelled out your hard-earned latinum for your very own copy. No. You wanted something more valuable. You wanted my wisdom. You wanted the inside knowledge that have made the Ferengi a force to be reckoned with in the business world. In other words, an edge on the competition. You want that edge. You need that edge. Yeah, I know what you're going to tell me. You're a human. You're better than us Ferengi. You've evolved beyond greed. Well, I say to you, study that figure in the mirror. Look at yourself. Look long and hard. And you'll come to realize that you are living proof of the 284th rule of acquisition. Deep down, everyone's a Ferengi.
You have been listening to Star Trek Deep Space Nine, Legends of the Ferengi by Quark, as told to Ira Stephen Bear and Robert Hewitt Wolfe. It was abridged for audio by George Truitt. It was read by Quark, otherwise known as Armin Shimmerman. Linda Woolman was paid piles of latinum to direct Quark in this production. Congratulations, Linda. Additional Ferengis were played by Tom Reedy and John Beach. The recording engineer was Jocelyn Gonzalez, live from the field from the planet Ferenginar. Editing and post-production by Michael Jones. The mix engineer was Jocelyn. No, Jocelyn was our field engineer. And no, I really do think it was Michael Jones again. Yes, the original music was composed and performed by Michael Jones again.
All right. Jay Wasco helped me write those jingles. Negus knows I paid him enough latinum.
He's lovely. The associate producer was Florence Burrow Adams. Legends of the Ferengi was produced and directed by Karen Frillman. Heck of a job. This has been a wonderful, stimulating, yet another presentation of Simon & Schuster Audio.